And you should now have the ability to share your screen and be good to go. And I'll be here to facilitate. You're going to do questions at the end, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Cool. I'll keep track of your questions for you, and you can go ahead and get started. We're right at time, so have fun.
Oh, sweet. All right. Cool. Is the angle okay? Cool.
Yeah, it looks great.
Cool. Well, thanks. Definitely thanks for having me. Let me minimize this. Sorry, I just need to minimize this. Thank you. Awesome. Cool. We're good to go. Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks, GRIMMCon, for putting this on. Definitely was excited to hear about this. Definitely even more excited to participate. It's always great to work with something that like you definitely feel like passionate about. Of course, we all feel passionate about like security, but also seeing a company that really takes security seriously and does a lot of awesome work. Yeah. So who am I? My name is Oshea Bownes. I'm the founder and CEO of Null Hat Security. I'm also the technical security manager at DraftKings here in Boston. I founded a conference called GRIMMCon, started a podcast. So I do a lot of weird things and mostly working in security, even when I'm not actually working in security. Yeah, if you're ever around Boston, you can likely find me around either Boston Security Meetup or DC 617. Do stuff at ISSA. Just became the official trainer for Blacks in Cyber, and then cybersecurity nonprofit. I'm on their board. So why the title? Something that I noticed, and I think it was actually in the previous slide, is I spend a lot of my time mostly in security operations. I've been in security for almost 11 years, and majority of that time, I'd say at least 6 to 7 years of that time, have been in a SOC somehow in some capacity. And what I've noticed over the last couple of years is really this more of like a shift where we're no longer only focused on what the IDS can put out or what the SIM can put out. There's other areas of security that really have implications that maybe aren't necessarily under the roof of security operations, which is like AppSec and DevOps, which we're going to dive into. But I thought about that, and I thought about what happens when things are a bit unbalanced, or from a strategic perspective, if one individual or entity takes an advantage without that cohesion from another party or entity. And I thought about kind of like Nash Equilibrium around like strategies where players leave things unchanged and everyone actually wins. But if one individual were to create a change, second individual does not, it's a lose-lose situation. And I kind of feel like that's kind of where we've been going in regards like security operations centers. So I just wanted to talk about it and give you an idea of kind of what I'm up to nowadays. Yeah, so we'll run through, what exactly is a SOC and a few different areas around the direction of security operations centers or SOCs. And we'll speak about how we push left. And the primary thing I want to take away from this is like, hey, it's not, there is a method, and maybe it's not totally like written out, and it's not like a white paper, even though I feel like I should write this because I've been talking about it for almost a year and a half. But maybe there is another way to put on a different, thinking cap and think about, how do we start to become more familiar as security analysts and engineers in the SOC with more areas of like AppSec and DevOps, right? Cool. Yeah, so I mentioned, like I said, I grew up in the SOC. If you're unfamiliar with security operations centers or SOCs, there's the Digital Guardians definition. I did not think there would be this many sentences for just describing what security analysts do. Like I always thought in my head, it was essentially, hey, I show up, I look at some logs, I write some scripts, I parse some logs, do that faster, and I help find bad stuff, and then I go home, right? But and then of course there's more than that, and being sarcastic. But at the same time, when I reviewed the Digital Guardians definition, I was like, oh wow, that's a lot, and I actually have to cut some out. But in reality, to me, a SOC is really, I call it proving ground. I think there's a huge percentage of individuals that step into security that end up in the SOC, and I think that's one of the best places to actually begin to kind of determine and learn different areas of InfoSec. Like I went from security analyst to IR to learning more on the intel side, and then that all helped me grow, just most definitely as a professional, but I think as an individual too, because you're exposed to so many different personalities. So and I work better. I'm the type of person I work better in like team environments. So when I have someone else that has a totally different set of ideas that's sitting next to me, those are the people I want to be around, especially people that I think are more talented in areas that I'm not. And moving down from the SOC explanation, I think all joking aside, at the end of the day, yes, it is like a serious role, but but what makes up this entity or what makes up this this mesh of weirdos that are all working together. It's really people. It really comes down to people, processes, and technology, right? Like you got great people, you got strong processes, but you got really awesome tech. Sometimes you're on the low ball that you don't have the best tech in the world, but you have the people in the processes, so you don't have to spend that $300,000 on a sim if you got 4 or 5 individuals that are really passionate and curious that can build out really awesome things leveraging like open source tools. I've been on both sides. I guess I'm kind of in the middle. Money doesn't solve all problems, but it definitely makes you forget about your bad problems, I guess, if you want to look at it that way. And at the end of the day, I always say, and when I speak about security operations, it really comes down to 3 different pillars, right? That's monitoring, detection, and response. We're all familiar with the monitoring aspect, right? That comes down to logging. I kind of am one of those weirdos and kind of a log freak, so I hamper down on like, do you have an idea of what you're collecting, why you're collecting it, right? Like, do you have Linux and Windows boxes? Like, what are you actively doing to leverage and make best of what you can actually obtain? That's I would say majority of the times at least from an IR perspective, the times I have been called in, it's not as if they weren't collecting logs, or it wasn't as if they were totally just like abject, just turned off the switch in regards to their collection. It was really they were either they were collecting and they weren't viewing, or they collected so much that their log rotation killed a lot of the valuable information, right? So I always kind of hamper down on like understanding your logging at the very minimum. That is something that takes like the least amount of effort in my mind. Managing your tools and creating more scripts for maybe like forensic collection and artifact gathering. Yeah, that's stuff that takes a bit more time and a bit more experience and skill and technique. But at the minimum, when you actually understand your logging, I think that always puts you ahead. Like I teach that all the time. Like know your logs. So where did the SOC go wrong? Well, in a sense, we didn't. A lot of what's happened over the last like 5 or 6 years is just more applications have come online than like ever in history, and we've seen a shift regarding the way that we deploy applications and how we actually manage our infrastructure. And with these 2 different areas, these 2 distinct areas, this is where I believe a lot of the missteps, and this doesn't speak to every organization. I think every organization is definitely different, but I do think it speaks to where you find a lot of medium-sized businesses that are running very fast towards development, but are essentially lagging in areas of security. And I don't think that's a malicious intent or purposely done. I think it's one of those situations where the individuals that are responsible for the security of the organization aren't necessarily thinking or reaching out to the individuals from the development, from the DevOps and AppSec perspective. And I think that's where you see a lot of a lot of things that fall over, right? So what is DevOps, right? We hear this, if you're on Curbs or if you're on Threat Post, you hear a lot about what's going on, what this new thing called DevOps. In reality, it's not that new. It's been around for, I don't know, 8-9 years. But essentially, it's in plain English, I think it's just a process removing barriers between software development and IT operations, right? So you're breaking these things down into a couple of different buckets, right? You're breaking it down into coding, you're breaking it down into building, testing, packaging, and releasing, right? So the coding aspect is like the code development and the review, a source code and management tools, and building comes around to like continuous integration of tools and build status testing, just like it sounds, right? When you think about before you actually deploy to prod, what are you doing in here? You're testing you're testing tools and you're testing tools that you would like to know if they can provide quick and timely kind of feedback and help identify like business risk. And one of the areas that I think is kind of interesting is like, at least to me, I speak for myself and I say, I think I always have to speak for myself, but it wasn't until maybe like 4 or 5 years ago when I really sat down and started speaking to individuals that were operating in a DevOps capacity, I guess official DevOps capacity. I was working for a company, and these were individuals that were sitting, maybe 20 to 40 meters away from me. And I saw them for days and weeks and months at a time and never really thought to ask, what are they working on and what their day-to-day looks like. And I thought, me at that point as like a security leader, not like a leader in the industry. I mean, like I was actually like a manager, but as a manager, I felt kind of like a dummy, if I'm being honest, right? Like I would sit in meetings with them, and I would literally wait to hear things around security because my mindset was, well, unless it totally relates to security, maybe, this is going to be a quick meeting for me. And after a few months of kind of like brushing up on my own, I began to sit down and shadow one of the DevOps engineers. And at the time, he was fairly junior, and I guess he was shocked that I wanted to actually like shadow him. But I wanted to learn. Like that's the best way I learn. I imagine is like a lot of different individuals where you actually have to sit down and put hands to keyboard. And then over years and years and years, I start to think about how this actually affects security operations really. When you think about DevOps pipeline from CI/CD or continuous integration and continuous development, where does security really fit in there? You don't hear a lot of talk around hey, we need to have this specific processes in place where security engineering or security operations is aware that we're moving to this specific version of Linux for this specific repo inside of Docker or something along those lines. Like you don't really hear a lot of those conversations, I feel like, as a security practitioner, unless you kind of force your way in there and you actually start asking these questions. And it's not to say that anyone in DevOps is ignoring, I'll say willfully ignoring security practices or thinking about what actually happens from build to breach. It's really just they have no interaction with us, right? Like there's this gap where we're not really sitting down and talking to each other. So when you're thinking about like CI/CD or you're thinking about like SCM and how they want to like actually avoid merges and conflicts and build automation tools and web app service, all these different areas allow you as a security practitioner to kind of dive in and toss something in there, right? Like you can start asking questions around processes. You can start asking questions around, how are we checking images before they're actually deployed through the pipe and up into our cloud environment, whether that's AWS or GCP. You can start asking questions around what type of activity should we see once that container is launched? Like, should we see this weird call out to, a non AWS domain and a non business related domain? Like you start to ask these questions when you see their actual work. I know this is an older chart in regards to, deployment frequencies a day, and something it's probably a weird thing to think about, but something I think about is when you get to that level where you're at like an Amazon or Google or Netflix, and then it's 500 deployment frequency, 500 right now. This is like 2 or 3 years old, so who knows where those numbers are. But I take the pessimistic view at times. I think, man, it's like one bad build, and then it could be opponent's time inside of my own organization. And if I'm too lazy to actually ask what's going on, really honestly, like shame on me. And moving down, and from a DevOps side, I think this also applies to like AppSec. And I think AppSec is really, it's a strange area. I say like I'm so like thankful for OWASP, honestly. Like I haven't taken like any application security like courses or anything like that. I just happen to like cruise on OWASP's website and look at their project like a lot. Like they have some really awesome stuff, like their threat automation playbook. I didn't even think that, I didn't know that obviously I didn't know it existed because I just found it like a year ago. But there's so many other little weird projects that you can take, even if you're not a developer. Like I'm not a developer by any means. I code a bit, but that's not my background. But there's so many different areas you can pull from within OWASP to actually get to that point where you could ask these very like technical questions, but also accurate questions from your developers. And something I've noticed in a couple of different organizations, not just from full-time, but from a consultancy perspective, is when I spoke to like the AppSec individuals, they were here and, security operations is over here, right? Like they're not necessarily, they're under the same roof, but they're not, on the same team. And that can cause problems, right? Like, if there's bad code out there and you're an analyst or engineer or working in an incident response capacity, you don't know what you don't know, right? And I think you should care because as I like to consider myself more of a defensive operator. I've always like loved defense. I know there's always like, I think like a lot of people in the industry, especially new people that are moving into the industry, have like a strong affection for like red teaming. I'm just not one of those people just yet. So I've been kind of taking more time and looking into DevOps and AppSec to kind of learn what I can do from a proactive perspective, right? And this is kind of that's essentially what led to this talk. When you think about what do we learn as security analysts? Well, are your analysts actually sitting down and thinking about OWASP top 10 or top 20? I mean, top 10 at the minimum, but are they thinking about like these areas of application security that may not be pertinent and directly related to their job, but the causation of, bad code or bad deployments or weak security configurations actually lead to, me coming in as an incident responder, right? And I think now, I put on maybe the proactive hat, and I'm thinking, well, how can I learn more about our development and where the vulnerabilities are in our code before I get called in to assess like an incident, right? And this is only becoming more and more popular. Like the DBIR report, which came out about 2 months ago, comes out every year from Verizon, the Data Breach Investigations Report. They give you some really awesome statistics around, what the threat landscape looks like, not necessarily from naming different threat actors or attributing, attributing activity to nation state, but really just, a plain English. Hey, there in 2019, there were 45% of the breaches caused by malicious actor. Something I do think is actually kind of interesting, which is telling of where the threat landscape is actually moving towards, is you're seeing this high spike in percentage of crimes or cybercrime that's happening specifically by organized crime, right? So there's no longer, the mob breaking kneecaps because, the Jets quarterback didn't cover the spread, and now you can't pay up. It's really like, well, how can we not go to jail? I think criminals are the same as, businessmen. They think about risk, and their risk is just a bit different. Their risk is jail, so they're thinking, how can we get more bang for our buck without putting ourselves in compromising positions with law enforcement? And hiring some hackers could potentially get you there, right? And moving into like, thinking about what can I do as an individual inside of security operations. And this kind of comes down to a few different responsibilities that are the base premises of what AppSec is, right? So, really understanding static code analysis and dynamic code analysis, threat modeling, and pen testing. I'm not saying that you need to become an expert in all of these. What I am saying is, with the amount of resources that are out there that are like free and that allow you to learn, start to pick apart a few of these. Give yourself 3 months to kind of walk through each one of these and try to undertake these, right? So from a Dash perspective, you're looking at dynamic application security tools, which is really looking at the results, reviewing the results of applications that are ran and looking for activity. Looking for vulnerabilities from the running application. From a static perspective, you're stepping through lines of code, and there's loads of tools out there that you can get for free to help you get there. And and then how do you bring this into a position where you can actually leverage it at work, right? All this stuff is great if you can read about static, if you can read about threat modeling, if you can read about DAS, but what do you do at work? So let's just take an example, right? So here's like a really simple little app that I built along with a friend of mine. I've been using it and leveraging this for application security testing and for pen testing. So I'm thinking about this from a defender's perspective. Me, a security analyst, well, what can I do with this? Okay, I need to understand what the app actually is. So what's that threat model? How does it take requests? Where are those API endpoints? What's the problem I need to solve? Well, we just spoke about some of the problems about 4 or 5 slides ago in regards to like static and dynamic analysis. Those are that's what gets you to the point where you understand where those problems actually are. So taking the time to actually map out these steps. If you have an application security team that you can do this with, all the better, right? If not, you might be on your own and you have to leverage like Bone Hub or something along those lines to begin building this stuff out. And as you're moving into stage 2 of actually testing these things, so you have some craftily written application that you can use for testing, or maybe just ask the guys to spin you up something at work, or you leverage one of the free resources. You're thinking, okay, well, what is the life cycle from a vulnerability and exploit look like, right? I got to get down to the attack. The vulnerability is likely in the code, so how do I get to payload infection and attack? And is this real life? Yeah, in a sense, it's likely what attackers are doing to your environment, right? It's just not as simulated. So we're taking we're putting on our hunting hat or our attacking hat as SOC operators, and okay, we're going to identify the app. Great, we've identified it. Let's get some tools in there and run against static and dynamic analysis. Again, a lot of open source tools that allow you to do this. So sweet, you're in the money, right? Actually, you're out the money because you didn't spend any money. And now you're running tools and you're coming back with some analysis from a dynamic perspective. Okay, well, what's something that I can easily spin up to actually test a vulnerability? For this one, I just selected PHP. That's super easy to test and super easy to try to circumvent. Based on our threat model, what do we care about? We spoke about that earlier when we review the application. It's something that takes orders. So we mostly care about faulty transactions and monitoring like our API endpoints, but we need to test it. You got to test the thing to know what's wrong. And as you begin to think about this, you put on that blue team hat and you're going back to like, okay, I'm still in the SOC, but I'm thinking about AppSec. I'm thinking about DevOps. All right, I'm cruising, right? And this is that time when this is something I've been harping on the last couple of years is really, I think I heard Jorge mention this earlier before the previous talk, before Dave's talk, is like, purple teaming, and when I think about purple teaming, again, I'm not, a pen tester, not a pen tester at all, but I think about what can I take away from learning from pen testers, from a consultancy perspective, but also being friends with like a lot of good pen testers, right? And something I learned that really does bother me is like we ask very little of a lot of pen testers. We ask them to get in, give us a report, and leave. I think that's a bit lazy. I think we need to, it's a waste of time in some ways, in my opinion, if you're not actually getting obtainable information that you can leverage to strengthen your security posture. So if they're only giving you the fix or vulnerability, that's great. But I really want to know, hey, is the way that we're actually deploying firewalls within GCP wrong or AWS wrong? Are the rights to on this box out of place, or do we need to do something there? Like you have to think a bit beyond like just what the vulnerabilities are, and you're paying for it. So in my mind, I think you should ask it. It's like you've already given the money, and you're taking like sometimes like the least valuable product that they can give you. And it's not to say all pen testers do that. I think there's some, they have a job, they did their job, they get in and out. You don't ask for it, you don't get it, right? And here, like again, this is going back into like really understanding what can I grab from actively putting on my application security hat and putting on my pen test hat. Maybe I'm not the best, but let's try to test that PHP vulnerability. Let's try to determine how far I can actually take it, right? And then, we know that when we built this, so we know it's vulnerable, but now we're just thinking, okay, well, how can we actually go in and grab, how can we use like that PHP vulnerability for like local file inclusion? From local file inclusion, can we upload a specific payload that will likely like beacon back out and call to us? And if it can call to us, what's the secondary stage and how far can I take it from there, right? So, we're able to prove that, okay, great, we can return, we know that the payload executed because we're able to return data from the command line in the browser. Okay, great. Now, and at the same time, while you're doing all these things, you're documenting it. Maybe not you, or maybe you're working with someone next to you as a team, and you're documenting these things. You're thinking about, okay, well, we have this EDR solution in place. What should I see from the EDR solution perspective, right? If we're running this on an Apache box, should I see something spin up in Ben? Should I see a new process you spin up that's actually calling out to like some external IP that we don't know? Again, you don't have to be like the best of the best to do these things. I like to say, I like to say it, but truthfully, I'm not a pen tester, I kind of suck at it, but these are things you kind of learn by reading and trying and trying. Like YouTube's a free resource, like use it, And when you think about taking this back to it from a defensive perspective, you're taking what you can do, asking more, not only from your vendors from a logging and detection perspective, but really of yourself. You're asking, hey, what should I catch on this box with these super expensive tools that I'm paying for from an EDR or from IDS or from a SIEM solution perspective to help us map to likely attack vectors and techniques that an attacker may actually use against us. And some of this goes into Attack MITRE, like there's another talk I'm doing actually in a couple of days with SINS, and that's really speaking to like, hey, how do I take all these things I'm doing here and map it to Attack MITRE as a defender? So now I know what techniques actually work, and now I need to understand, how do I map that to attack, and how do I use that to leverage to create countermeasures and signature detection. And as a security operations professional, you can put on the red team hat and you can start going up that pyramid of pain, right? So yeah, now we're getting out of like, hey, we're not just looking at hash values that were produced by, I don't know, like Cybereason or something. We're looking at, TTPs that we're able to create ourselves. And I think that's an awesome place to be. And you start thinking about pushing left and getting better and better at implementing security into security operations, and it's, again, simple tools you can grab. Some are expensive, some aren't, some are free, some aren't. but you're looking at, okay, what can I do with a OWASP SaaS? What can I do with a Burp Suite in order to actually start testing these vulnerabilities? And once I test them, how can I actually detect them on my side? Where's that telemetry? And to me, I think that's like one of the funnest things to do inside the SOC, because you're not this single operator. You're surrounded by other people that likely are going to be interested in this too. So if you show passion, you're getting excited, you got your motor running. The people around you are likely getting excited. They got their motor running, and you just start to create really, really awesome material. And I think from a perspective of like communicating with AppSec, I think on the left is like a really good synopsis of like what it looks like when you don't have that open communication or when you're not speaking with them, because all these different areas of remediation or what's in QA for from application security perspective, I mean, from an app development perspective, could be pushed together, and you can inject yourself inside that inside the SDLC and sit down with QA and begin to think about where can I apply security in these different areas. April Wright, who's also here in Boston, she wrote a really good book about this that I've been reading. Just really thinking about SDLC and how do I move left. When you understand that part of the application build process, you start to understand deployment. And I wrote this slide out, but really at its simplest, it's really thinking about what's the base image and what's the package, or to push that code to a container, right? Like that's all you're really getting down to is 2 steps, start to finish. It doesn't matter what tool is actually in place. You can leverage anyone. You can leverage something to get you to the point where you actually can actually start running analysis and statistics against your deployments. And you're moving, and as you're going to the lab, you're thinking about golden images and golden pipelines. Golden image being one image that is clean, that you can deploy at any given time as like a fallback. And if something fails, from a build perspective, it doesn't make it to prod, or that PR actually is rejected, right? Like you're thinking about ways to automatically test and validate security vulnerabilities, all that stuff that we just walked through. You're thinking about how you incorporate that into your build process to keep you safe and jump ahead of things. And another area which, we don't have time to go into right now, but from a repo management perspective, one of the things I always try to advocate for is like, scanning of your repos, looking for those hard-coded access keys and tokens. There's a lot of tools out there that can help you with that. You have Bitbot, Veracode, and GitRob, sorry. And then, again, the simplest picture of going from start to deploy is, if something doesn't equate to the standard process from a security perspective, then you need to break it, kind of like plain and simple. You're going to get into some fights about this, so this is why I suggest going back and looking at those areas around DevOps and AppSec and starting to learn these things and ask questions, so you can get to this point where as a incident responder and as a security practitioner, you're breaking the build before you're called in to remediate things. And this is just, a quick little run through of like, moving from start to finish, like what that actually looks like. So from dev QA to pre-prod, going back, and then, having a Panda throw a computer at you, then moving into production. Yeah, so in conclusion, what I recommend as a security practitioner, getting yourself out there, learning more, start asking questions around DevOps, start asking questions around AppSec. And I know I'm out of time, so any questions?
Yeah, and I think what you've been talking about, Oshea, for the last chunk of time has really resonated with a lot of folks. And there's just a few questions. Obviously, we've got in the Discord, and we could stick around for a little bit if you're all right with it, and do a little Q&A still.
Yeah, I'm cool with that.
Yeah, just a few things. And one of the questions immediately that jumped out is, folks that are part of a small business, as an example. Right, those, and they can't necessarily afford to do AppSec, or they may be outsourcing their SOC and they've got MSSPs and things like that. Do you have any recommendations for folks who want to use these behaviors that you've been talking about for the last chunk of time, but maybe just don't have the resources for it, or they have outsourced a lot of these operations, but still want to get some of the benefits of the activities you've been talking about?
Yeah, so I'm kind of a cheap person, so I look for anything that's free. And it sounds crazy, but if you could use something like a C2, like the C2 project, and then actually take things from like Metasploit and Burp Suite, and I start trolling Twitter, honestly. I pull up my tweet deck and I start scrolling for hashtags, and it sounds crazy, but it works. You know, like that. Like I'll search for like Empire, and I'll have like Empire and C2 as like a hashtag or something like that, and I can find someone that's like you run into the same problem, and you know, and it sounds like a joke, but there's so many free resources out there. But in all seriousness, like if it's outsourced and you don't have that capability, I think, you know, you're kind of stuck with two choices at a job. It's either you take the initiative and test these things out yourself from that free perspective, or you ask to go to training, right? You suck it up and ask, hey, can I go to, you know, can you send me off to Sand, or can you send me off to Black Hat, or whatever it may be, you know, because I'm a big fan of just like do it. Like I'm not exaggerating when I say I'm horrible at AppSec and pen testing, but I just try it. And, you know, when it works, it's great. Then I can think about, okay, but I am better at detection. So I know it worked. So how can I detect it, and how can I build out countermeasures and signatures?
That's great. And that's the kind of thing of like, you know, pull yourself up by the bootstraps and do whatever sort of defense validation you can, even if that SOC is a third party, right? And I think that kind of hearing someone like you say, no, it's okay. You're giving these people money. You might as well test to see how they're doing, right? And there's lots of free ways to do that. That really resonates. So no,
Yeah.
Another question is, you talked a lot about DevOps, right? So when we think about DevOps and we think about, you know, a SOC traditionally is about log monitoring and curation and looking for alerts and that sort of thing. If you think about DevOps and you're thinking like Docker containers that are spun up and spun down and burned to the ground, how do we reconcile these two things? Because it seems like the DevOps universe is fundamentally designed to make everything ephemeral. And how do you do an incident response on a Docker container that was burned down 48 hours ago and that sort of thing? So do you have any wisdom as to like, how do we reconcile the ephemeral deployment universe and the SOC log monitoring, you know, the incident response world?
Yeah, it's a tough. I don't know if I have the 100% answer, like, because it's a tough cookie, yeah. Because I don't know anyone that I think you have to go. So like I'm mostly on the SOC side. Like I do a lot of IR, but I mean I'm a manager, but I still do like a lot of IR and cloud tech stuff. So I think you have to jump ahead and start to really understand what vulnerabilities look like in that image that you're going to deploy. One, so if you understand that, you understand what may exist in your cloud infrastructure before you even start thinking about like a layer 3 perspective and how someone may touch it. If you understand the vulnerabilities of the image, that's bonus points for you. But the second one is like really understanding like best practices around deployment, right? So who can actually deploy, who can tear down, how do you make a quick image of that, and can you inject something into that Docker image from like a security perspective, from an IR perspective? It's weird because you would think, not to bash in soccer, you would think they'd have some type of like, hey, here's a Docker handbook for security, because you know what we're doing is like borderline, I don't want to say insecure, but it's like if you're not careful, you can open up a lot of things from the outside if you're not really paying attention, right? And so, but that just doesn't. I mean, if it does exist, I'd love to see it. Like, I'd love to see some Docker, just like pure Docker security guide that's like 20 pages that you can just keep at your desk.
No, that's perfect. And really it is one of those interesting dichotomies that you've identified. Like, where did we go wrong with all this stuff? And these are the kinds of challenges that people are encountering. And it's great to hear that, you know, there's not some secret handbook that we all just don't know about yet, and that everybody's encountering these challenges. So that's great. So I know you're going to be around in the Discord for a while as well, but thank you for your time. There's some folks who are still chatting in there and have some questions for you, and well done. And yeah, we really appreciate you coming and talking.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, thanks, Oshea.